Hello, this is Mish from Downtime Distractions with a first look review of Shadow's Peak. So with our first look reviews, we define the difference between first look over a full review with 3 caveats. So that's gameplay time is under 8 hours, the game has not been completely finished or beaten, and there's room to gain more skills and knowledge across single or multiple facets of this title. So with that out of the way, let's dive in and see what this game is all about. Okay, and here we are in Shadow's Peak. So this title is a story-driven, atmospheric horror game with a focus on exploration. Shadow's Peak is coming out to early access on 18th of March. Price on release will be $7.99 US, and there'll be a 15% discount on launch. This title is brought to us by a developer named Andre Vintish. I probably butchered that name, so please forgive me. This developer has brought us other titles previously. About a year ago, there's one called Gynophobia, which is an interesting game. If you don't know what then that word means, it's an irrational fear of women. And it's got very mixed reviews on Steam. I encourage you to go take a look because it's an interesting read. But with this title, the basic premise of what's going on here. So it looks like you've gone on holiday with your partner, and all of a sudden you both collapse on a pier out by the ocean. And when you wake up, she's gone, and you must find her. So that's really the main driving goal for the protagonist of this title. That's when you take over as well. You wake up from the blackout, and you're trying to find her. And there's a curious message on your phone, and the exploration begins. One interesting and I thought refreshing component I found straight away was there was no hand-holding. There's no tutorial, which I think is very good because for games like this, that really takes you out of the world that you're in and the immersion of a title. Some games can get away with it. They kind of, added into the story somehow, but for this one it wasn't required. The inputs are so minimal of the character anyway, it's not really necessary. Speaking of the inputs, let me jump in and I'll show you the basic inputs and how you interact with the world around you. And that after that we'll get into the graphics, audio, and gameplay, and really get into the pith of the title. Okay, so let me just show you the basic inputs of this title. So it handles very similar to an FPS. You've got the basic movements of W, A, S, and D, and the mouse to look around, and you get a crouch and a jump and a lean as well, which I had never used, but it is there if you really want to lean in this title. And you have a couple items. Let's say it's in an inventory. Even though there's only very few items. So you have a phone, which is crucial for the story to travel along, and you have a torch, my battery just died, and a knife. So these are all items I picked up in the game, apart from the phone, which you start with. So you also come across certain items which you can interact with as well. So for example, this one here, so the fridge, open it, and you can actually pick up the piece of meat inside. And physics are quite strange on that item, but nevertheless. Another important one is the save stones, which are dotted around the place as well. So I just wanted to show those features there to give you an idea of how this game handles in this respect. So with that out of the way, let's really jump into looking at the graphics, audio, and gameplay. Okay, so before I start talking about graphics, I just wanted to mention something here. I loaded up Alan Wake and had a couple hours in there, and I also loaded up Outlast and I had spent some time in that game. The reason I did that is I'm not comparing this game, I'm judging it on its own merits, but I just wanted to get some ideas and get a bit of a baseline from other titles, because I know there's many people passionate about these types of games, and I can see why. The Alan Wake is fantastic. But yeah, so that's the reason I've done that. And I'll reference those sometimes. As I said, I'm not judging it against them, I'm just using it as a baseline, what I think is an acceptable standard of these types of games. Okay, so let's talk about graphically. So graphically, as you can probably see, it looks a little dated. It's definitely adequate in its presentation, but it felt that certain points in the title there was a real paucity of assets, a little sparse here and there. But that being said, it was completely functional and it didn't take anything away from the gameplay. So I'll say graphically it is functional, average graphically. Nothing amazing, I wouldn't say it's hideous by any stretch of the imagination, but it does its job. Okay, so let's talk about audio. Now, I'm a real stickler for audio. I really like to scrutinize down on audio assets and audio tracks. And for this title, I was pretty impressed with the audio tracks and the general ambient sounds. The audio tracks delivered very well. They're very eerie, and they really do eat away at your paranoia during the game. And the ambient sounds, the spacing on those sounds and the assets themselves are very good. There's not too much of them, because I guess if you expose the player to too much of something, you lose that impact. And this has been spaced very well, so you get the whispers in your ear every now and again, and it's just to the point where it keeps reminding you of the dire situation you're in. So I think sound overall has been pretty well delivered. Okay, so let's start with gameplay, and let's first off address the elephant in the room, which is this title took me an hour and a half to complete, and it is coming out to early access at the price of $7.99 US. So is that acceptable? It's very tricky. It's value for money, right? The Steam page says that Chapter 2 will be released in the future for free. And it's that old argument of early access and do we trust the developers? Now the problem is, I generally would, but I know a lot of people have been burnt by early access before. A lot of games haven't been completed, haven't get the updates they're told they're going to get, so a lot of people will be gun-shy about that, and I fully understand that situation. I just wanted to bring that to the first main issue I've seen is that in itself. Are you happy to spend $8 for a game which probably, let's be generous, 2 hours is going to take you to finish? And more's coming in the future, but will it ever arrive? That is the other question. Okay, so with that said, let's talk about the other gameplay components that I want to talk about here. First one would be how the character interacts with the world around him. I don't think that's delivered very well. There's much room to improve, and this is early access, so this is the time to improve. There's things where I guess the gravity and physics don't feel right sometimes. You kind of ricochet, when you're running, you ricochet off a rock, and you'll go flying to like a super jump. And I guess your interaction with rocks, and you saw that hunk of meat I took out of the fridge didn't really feel right. It doesn't behave correctly, and a few other things too like that, where I guess the knife is the same. It doesn't feel good, but generally the movement apart from that is acceptable. I would just like to see those things improved upon to really get that a better feeling for the character. Okay, so let's talk about the story, how it's delivered with the exploration. Now, a lot of people will say, is this just a walking simulator? I mean, it kind of is in a way, but in saying that, I did like walking around. I wasn't forced in a linear direction. An example would be of that is in Alan Wake. That is so linear, you're going from point to point. You can even see the parts where you trigger an action of something. So that's not ideal. But for this title, it was more you're just going along in the world, trying to figure stuff out to get to a point where you don't know that end goal yet. And I did like that freedom. So that's that impressed me in itself, is that how that's delivered. And you still managed to follow the story along. So that was quite well done. The story is minimal. It's intriguing enough, but I found it could have been some more in there to give you a bit more depth about the characters and the situation you're in. But in saying that, a lot of people will say that they've done it in a suggestive way, and when I say that, I mean they'll give you part of a story or part of a situation, and you fill in the blanks with your imagination. I really like that. It really, to me, that's the best way to deliver a story, is you almost give the start and the end and you fill in the middle. Okay, so as we know, this title's coming out to early access. So let me list some things I think the developer could really improve on, which I think would help. And obviously early access is the time to make improvements and for community feedback. So here we go. Okay, so suggestions. As I mentioned with the gameplay, it would be good to get that kind of physics a bit more sorted out. Okay, and One other thing I'd like to say is remove the big falling boulders. They do nothing. If you're trying to suggest that someone is watching you or something's moving in a location you can't see, just use the sound and maybe just a couple of little pebbles. You don't need a massive boulder to come rolling down. And then once again, that's affected by the kind of poor physics and gravity, because it just looks pretty bad. So I say get rid of the bigger boulders and just leave it as pebbles rolling down the hill. More of a suggestion. Possibly remove the snakes and the frogs. I don't think they add anything to the game. I like the sound of if you're walking past a lake or a river and something jumps in it and you look and you can't see anything. I think that's a better way to deliver stuff like that, because that to me is a creepier way to do it. It's because you don't know, is it really wildlife or is it someone messing with you? So I think that's a better way to do stuff like that. More suggestive scares. That is a tricky one, because I guess that's a personal opinion. I find things more creepy in a game like this if you say you go into a room, you see an inanimate object sitting in a corner, let's say it's a wheelchair, right? Sitting in the corner, you go along, you access something else, you look away, do something, and all of a sudden that wheelchair is now spun around, or it's at the other side of the room, and you didn't hear it move, you didn't see it move, and you don't know what moved it. More stuff like that, because I think that's where this game shines over the Alan Wakes and the Outlasts, in its suggestive creepiness, more so than jump scares. So I hope that's some good suggestions. So let me just summarize my thoughts real quick, because I know this has gone on for quite long already. Okay, so what I'm saying in summary here, it's more about the ultimate question, right? Is this title worth picking up? Now, this is tricky, because on one hand, there's a big red flag to me, which is the value for money issue. So for $7.99, this title is currently 2 hours worth of content. That is not enough. If they release a future chapter, let's say they base it off the amount of time in this chapter, so another 2 hours. That is also a big assumption on my part, but let's just say. So we have 4 hours worth of content, and they do state on the store page, Steam store page, that they will be increasing the price as they release more content. So I don't know what this price will be when Chapter 2 is released. But even if Chapter 2 was released and the price was still $8, I think that's too much. For a little indie title with only 4 hours, I think you should be looking at $4 or $5. I mean, I know you can say it's a nominal difference, but I think there's a principle here. And I think that we should, say games like this, whilst they might have fantastic ideas and good features, for that content that needs to be cheaper. At some point you have to draw the line, right? So that's why I'm drawing it here. Okay, so that's enough about the value for money. So graphically, average. Audio is not too bad. There's some many good factors in there. Gameplay, it has flaws, but I was impressed by some things. How it kept the tension throughout the title. And the story, I'm intrigued at the story. I want to know what happens in Chapter 2. So there's some good parts there. But let me just, wrap up with an analogy. How I kind of like to compare things like this, situations like this, with games like this to movies. So if you want to say Alan Wake is a movie, and it's just come out at the theatres. It's a big budget film, AAA. It's a full ticket price, and everyone loves it. It's a mystery. It's a really good story, very popular. Outlast comes out. It's the same, full ticket price, very expensive to go and see it. It's very well liked. It's gory. It's scary. Everyone loves it. This title comes out, and it goes straight to Blu-ray or DVD, and straight down to your local video store. So you go down there to pick it up. So you expect the price to be cheaper, and you take it home with low expectations, but you're pleasantly surprised. It's got a good story, it's got a very creepy atmosphere to it, and you've generally had a good time whilst watching it. Not as good as going to the movies for the other ones, but it's different, right? So I think that, in summary, is kind of how I feel about this title. So I really hope I've given you an idea if you want to make the purchase with this one, or maybe wait a little bit longer and see how it goes, or completely miss this one. So yeah, I really hope I've helped you out. Please leave me some feedback. Give me a like if you liked it. Subscribe, helps us out going forward, and you get updated on when we release more reviews and stuff like that. And also we've got a Facebook page online now, so please check that out and like it, and I'll see you next time.